Hello and welcome to the Immaterial Podcast, where we explore the front page and the footnotes to discuss accounting, the law, and everything in between. I'm your host, Chris Ekimoff, and today we're joined by a special guest to discuss what fraud is, what fraud isn't, and how it may have been considered in the courtroom and throughout her career. Trini Ross served as the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of New York from 2021 through 2025 as the first Black woman to hold that position. Prior to her Senate confirmation for that position, she served as the Director of Investigations for the National Science Foundation Office of Inspector General, as an AUSA herself, and as an appellate attorney in private practice. A Western New York native, Trini earned her undergraduate degree from SUNY Fredonia, a master's from Rutgers, and her JD from the University of Buffalo Law School. After leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office in February of this year, Trini joined Harter, Secrest Emery as the head of their Government and Internal Investigations Practice Group. Trini's experience as a federal prosecutor gives her a unique viewpoint into white-collar crime, fraud, and the intersection of law and accounting, as well as her time launching and leading the Feds Demystified podcast while she was in office. Trini, thank you for joining us today.
Chris, I'm so happy to be here. I'm always looking for opportunities to talk about fraud. I don't know. Something's wrong with me.
No, something's right with you. And you and I, have been circling each other here in Western New York for a long time. And
True.
As it usually is the case with small town life, we had to go somewhere else to really get connected. You are one of the, I believe, highest rated presenters at this year's ACFE's Global Fraud Conference.
Oh, is that a fact? With my two co-presenters, I got to give credit where credit's due. Wasn't just me.
Molly and Stephanie, I'm sure you're listening and watching out there. You know it well. A great presentation on kind of the interview, the deposition, the expert witness, kind of the high stakes cross-examination that can happen. So we'll get to some of that down the road, but kind of the overarching idea for today's discussion, Trini, based on your experience and background, and the question I get all day when I talk about being in fraud investigation and forensic accounting is, what is fraud? And I'd love to hear you tell me what your take is. We can talk about the legal definition of it and all the implications there. But when someone comes up to you and says, Trini, what's fraud? How do you answer that?
Fraud really is about taking something from someone else under false pretenses, right? But that can happen in different ways. So a false representation, and if you think about like securities fraud, somebody saying you could get a 10%, think about Bernie Madoff, you could get a 10, 11% return all the way through
forever,
no matter what the market is
right.
doing. And they know that's not true. People in the know that's not true. So that would be like a false representation fraud. And it could be for securities or anything. It could be for property, right? So that's one type. My favorite, a fan favorite here is concealment. Concealment fraud is kind of what gets me up in the morning. And that's where people are hiding certain facts. They're hiding certain information to get you to believe something that just isn't so if you had all the information, right? So we see a lot of concealment fraud, especially in financial institution fraud. That's a big concealment fraud. But there's also false promises, which kind of goes back to what I said about false representations. Like, in the SEC fraud, you could get 11%. But a false promise could be, here's this insurance policy, it's an annuity, it'll pay out, whatever, and it doesn't, right? So you've been promised this payout
into the future.
In the future, and you never got it. And these are just examples because, the fraud is bigger. It's much bigger. And then there's the abuse of position fraud. And in my career as an AUSA, which you mentioned, which was over 2 decades of actually boots on the ground prosecuting.
Yeah, you got it.
Right. People would abuse their position to defraud someone. And I'll never forget this. I had one case, and it was one of the saddest cases. I mean, it had some really sad cases, but this was one of the saddest cases because this was during the mortgage crisis, and people were looking to get assistance from the government to, reconstruct their mortgages so they wouldn't lose their homes. Well, what happened in this case, there was somebody at a HUD-approved agency who was actually a HUD-approved officer to help people with their modifications, their loan modifications. And she literally misused her position to take money from people who were already in a distressed situation. And then she gambled the money at the casino. So that would be an example of abuse of position fraud. Right. So those are just main categories.
Yeah, and I think, when it comes back to it, and I'll do my best to ask the lawyer while representing I know what's going on here. Trini, we talk about it. I do watch a lot of Law and Order, so I'm pretty close to maybe
Yes.
the first couple of weeks of law school I have down, but the rest of it, forget. But kind of those charges of fraud, you hit on a lot of those topics, right? The first is some misrepresentation, which can either be a positive misrepresentation or what my wife likes to talk about, lies by omission. Leaving out key information that someone needs to know. There needs to be some reliance on that statement or that representation, and then from that reliance there be some injury, right? Some harm to befall that person. And again, I'm oversimplifying a lot of the things we'll talk about today, but
No, but that's absolutely right, and that's what we're looking for, or what I used to look for when I was determining if it was a fraud case that should be prosecuted.
Yeah.
The one thing is sometimes, and I'll say sometimes, not all the time, even if there's no loss, from a criminal point of view, we could still bring a case as an attempted.
Yeah.
Right. So it really depends on the circumstances, but there is that possibility.
Right. And I want to get in too, because I think a lot of our listeners and viewers out there may not be as in the weeds on kind of the position of a U.S. attorney. There are 94 positions for U.S. attorneys, I think is the number.
U.S. attorneys at one given time.
And
Correct.
these are the men and women who are representing the U.S. government and prosecuting federal crimes only, right? There's no state allegations. There's no...
Well, with the exception of D.C., because that's a unique district that their state and federal prosecution all comes from the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office.
Understood. And so when you are talking about a case that you worked, right, you are representing, whether as an AUSA or as the sitting U.S. attorney, the law enforcement arm of the Department of Justice of the federal government to bring those cases.
Correct. And just to be clear, the U.S. Attorney's offices also handle civil cases because there can be civil fraud as well. And so sometimes we will have parallel proceedings where criminal assistant United States attorney, I shouldn't say criminal, I should say people in the criminal division would prosecute the criminal fraud, and people in the civil division would handle the civil fraud or a civil case. And think about healthcare fraud. That was an easy one where you could easily have parallel cases at the same time with civil and criminal.
Gotcha. Well, I guess, Trini, are folks from the U.S. attorney's offices out there on the streets just talking to people? Hey, have you seen any fraud recently? How do these cases come in? What are the ways in which an attorney's office will solicit information or start to kind of understand where these may come from?
Yeah, so cases could come in from a few different ways. The largest way is federal agents, this is their assignment, right? Is to try to weed out crime any way they can, and they go out and they can, do investigations and bring cases to the office. So that's the majority, I would say, of the way that these cases will go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. But the second way is citizens call in.
Yeah.
We literally were on duty when I was in AUSA 24 hours, sometimes over the weekend, where we would take calls, and we would take calls from citizens who would say, this is happening. My mom's in a nursing home. Her bank account was depleted. Now, some of these cases should be state cases or local. So you have the district attorney's office, you have the state AG's office, and then you have the U.S. attorney's office.
Right.
It really depends on the type of fraud. Some cases are easier for the feds to do because we can reach across jurisdictions where others have a harder time to do that.
Right.
So those are the two main ways that cases would come in. Either from the agents doing investigations, bringing us cases, or the public calling in saying, we believe some fraud has happened.
Well, let's say that call comes in, right? And let's say that Chris is a little bit upset at a business partner that he's worked with. And so he says, you know what? I'm going to call in the office and say that fraud happened.
Right.
I'm being facetious here, trying to create a hypothetical where you may take that call and not do anything with it because you can hear the anger in Chris's voice, and he's claiming that there's some wildly impossible type of situation versus those folks like you just talked about that are dealing with real life drained bank accounts or false promises. Where does the office go next to make a decision about, do we investigate, do we put more resources into this, or is Chris just a little bit off his rocker?
No, whenever we would get a call, unless it's something really unusual and
we'll
really
say out there,
really out there, I would refer it to an agent.
Yeah.
I would take the information. I mean, investigations aren't just to prove something. They're also to disprove, right? And so you don't know the answer to the question until you do a little, even if it's a cursory investigation, to see if something's there. And I will tell you, Chris, honestly, I had a case where the agents came to me and all we had were envelopes being delivered to abandoned addresses.
Okay.
In the envelopes, you could fill some sort of card. So we're assuming credit cards, right? So we have to get permission from the sender to open the envelope. You can't just open the envelope because you think something's amiss.
You got it.
We get permission, we open, we find green dot cards or prepaid credit cards. And then a little more digging to see, what we realized was there was this huge fraud scheme. Now, this is against the government for fraudulent tax returns that people were filing, taking other people's PII, which is their personal identifying information, your social security number, your date of birth, those sorts of things, filing fraudulent tax returns online, and then having it applied to a prepaid credit card that you could buy at any, convenience store or whatever.
Grocery store, Amazon,
having that delivered to abandoned addresses so they could go pick it up. Okay, so I thought when the agents came to me, this case is going nowhere. Sure, whatever you need. You need subpoenas, I'm going to give you whatever you need. This case is going nowhere. This case went to trial.
Wow.
This case went to trial. We worked from that. Envelopes, a postal carrier just saying, something's wrong here because I keep delivering these to abandoned addresses. And I know
nobody lives here, yeah.
And then all the way up to trial. We convicted 5 people.
Wow.
1 person went to trial. We convicted him of 58 felony counts.
Jeez.
And he got sentenced, I think, to 13 years in federal prison. He was already serving some time in state prison for a drug case in Ohio. So that's 13 and 11. That's 24 years, right? That he's serving. He's going to do his drug conviction, serve that time, and then he's going to do his federal conviction. And why am I telling you this? I don't even remember what the question was.
We were talking about making those considerations of where, a good tip comes in. Right. You got to look into that. Because if you're just seeing envelopes arrive at abandoned addresses, who cares, right? Where's the harm there? But you and the agents kind of unraveled this scheme that was defrauding the taxpayers,
worked
right?
Together and unraveled it. So that's my point. You have to do a little bit of an investigation just to see where it's going. Is there something really there? So nothing goes into a black hole. If someone were to call in, a citizen from the street, when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I would either call the agent myself and say, can you reach out to this person, get information, and let me know, or not. That's how we get the good cases.
Yep.
Right? Like 58 felony convictions. I think it's a record. I don't think anybody in my old office, either before or now, have ever had one trial where they got 58.
Big number. Yeah.
So.
That's excellent. And I think, too, I always think about investigations and I work with my clients to talk about beginning with the end in mind. What does done look like? When are we going to make a decision about, in your case or the U.S. Attorney's Office case, charging or not charging?
Right.
And I think that gets back to something I want to hear a little bit from you about today. What is a fraud case? What is the statute by which someone is charged criminally for fraud? You hear mail fraud, you hear wire fraud, you hear common law fraud. What does that mean? How do we think about those things? What do you look for with those types of cases?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And so most of the fraud statutes in the federal code are under Title 18, right? So you mentioned mail fraud, wire fraud. There's financial institution fraud, we know as bank fraud, access device fraud, fraud against the government. And this is usually found in Title 18. So anybody could Google fraud and it'll bring up. But there's fraud in other sections of the federal code too. For example, I mentioned this tax case. Well, that's under Title 26. Right. So that's a different section and it has all the tax laws, but it also has the fraud, like tax evasion is fraud against the government. Right. And then there's other statutes or other titles in the code and other statutes like FDA fraud. Right. And, selling bad makeup or food or whatever. There's fraud with import export and that's under a different section. So it's kind of scattered throughout, but most of it is in Title 18.
Gotcha.
And
sounds like that's... Go ahead.
Oh, no. Go ahead, Chris.
was gonna say, it sounds like that's the bedrock. And then, obviously if you're selling, makeup products that are marketed as being organic and they're not, right?
Right.
You're probably using the mail or the wire service, the internet to sell those. That's kind of charge one. Charge two may be something related to the compounds or the chemicals that are going into that.
Yes.
That might be related to the FDA side. So just kind of a quick way to think about it.
And that's exactly how we would charge. You wouldn't just charge one. You would charge the actual fraud, which let's say is tax evasion.
Right.
And then the fact that it was sent through the wires, right? So
Gotcha.
we would charge wire fraud and tax evasion. And so I think the second part of your question was, how do we determine if it's fraud? Well, every statute has elements of the offense.
Great.
And I would literally sit in my office after talking to an agent who first came in to present a case, and I would print off the elements of the offense and I would hand it to them. And based on our conversation, I might check a few off and say, we got these, but we don't have these. And I want us to be on the same page. Let's not waste time.
Right.
This is what I need to even make a determination if it's a case we should charge.
Gotcha. No, it seems like a little bit of an old school mentality in terms of not only printing and checking off a list, but really getting down to those fundamental rocks of how we think about that. So
I did a lot of old school things because I'm old, Chris.
No, you've had a very storied career, Trini. We'll say it that way.
Let me just say this.
Save the
Once
numbers.
agents came in to talk to me about a case, and as they're talking, I have pad and paper, pen, and I start sketching out as they're talking to me a draft indictment, right? Because this is the way my brain works. As you're talking, I'm like, oh, I can visualize this. Like, I'm a visual learner, right?
I like it.
I'm sketching it out, and finally one of the agents said, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm drafting the indictment. He's like that?
Yeah, freehand in this meeting? Yeah.
And I was like, yes. As a matter of fact, why don't you guys go to lunch? And when you come back, I will have a typed up draft indictment. And I did. So, old school. Yeah.
I like it. I like it. Well, Trini, obviously a long time on the government side, we'll call it, right? Being in the AUSA's office, supporting the Office of the Inspector General for the National Science Foundation, and obviously as the U.S. Attorney. Now you've got a different hat on. Right, you're on the private practice side, with a great firm here in Western New York. I'd like to think a little bit about, being on that client side of some allegation of fraud coming towards your client, defense or just in terms of understanding interactions with the government. What types of things does that fraud word to those elements, display to you now or display to the defense side when they're being charged or when those allegations are coming about? What types of things do you consider from that defense side against the government?
Holding the government to their burden, holding the government to their obligations. When I was on the prosecution side, this is why I gave the elements to the agents. This is what we have to prove. On the defense side, this is what I expect the government to prove. So it's the same skill set, just flipped upside down, right? Like 180 degrees. But it all comes down to there are procedures and processes and elements that have to be adhered to. And so when I was on the government side, I would make sure the government representatives adhered to that, including myself. And now on the defense side, I'm going to make sure the government representatives adhere to that. It's the same thing. It's really the same thing.
It is. You're on the defense side saying, okay, show me the checklist that you did in that first meeting with the agents.
Right.
So that we can talk about, where these things fall on the good side or the bad side of the line.
Exactly.
When it comes to that.
Exactly.
I mean, do you see some kind of common themes and maybe, not to point at any specific cases, but in your career on the prosecutorial side where the charges were brought, but, did not prevail at trial when it related to fraud? What types of defenses were there? What types of maybe misunderstandings happened throughout the investigation of the case that lead to a fraud allegation being dismissed or found not guilty?
Yeah, so it's interesting. In my entire career, I had one trial where the defendant was acquitted. It was a good verdict. I had no problem with that. It wasn't a fraud case. It was an assault on a federal officer case.
Gotcha.
My fraud cases were locked down because as the prosecutor, I decided if we had enough, I would present the case to the grand jury, see what the grand jury, and, in this day and age, we're learning grand juries do have power, people.
Yeah.
They have power. And I used the grand jury as my investigative tool. If they couldn't understand, if I didn't give them enough,
Gotcha.
I would present an indictment, right? I would just say, well, we can't find what they're looking for, right? And they're, people from the community who come in to sit and hear these
Right.
cases. And if I can't present to them what they need to make a decision to indict, which is just probable cause, not beyond a reasonable doubt, which it is at trial, then I'm not indicting a case. It's very important to know that when I was a prosecutor, we were very serious about not, trying to indict people where we didn't have the evidence to convict them. Like, that's under the federal principles of prosecutions. That's what we're supposed to do as prosecutors.
Right. Yeah, and especially, and thank you for kind of highlighting that. I always kind of chafed early in my career at why it's called a grand jury, or I expected them to have wigs on, like the solicitors in Britain, or to have some very ornate room. But I think grand just really means larger in this case, and kind of earlier in the process. There's
grand jury has 22 members on it, and whereas a petite jury, the trial jury only has 12. That's why it's grand.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. So you hear that and you think, what is this process? That's really how you get to that decision around indictment and then move to discussions prior to trial and that trial happening. But to your point, that it's pulled from the same group of people in the community who would serve as a grand juror or as a petite juror or a traditional juror that you may see. So if you can represent the facts to them and they are in agreement that there's probable cause, you feel a lot stronger about the case.
And not only that, they give good feedback.
Yeah.
They're just normal people who are saying, well, you said this because sometimes, you're too deep in the weeds of your case. You've had the case from the beginning and you know everything about it. And you feel the way you feel, like this is a case that should go forward. Right.
Yep.
And then you got people saying, well, wait a minute. Like, what about, and you're like, oh, like, I didn't even think of that, right?
Yep.
Because I'm in the weeds and I know. And like you said, I'm thinking about the end of the case at the beginning. When the case comes in the door, I'm thinking about appeal. People are like, how are you thinking about appeal? You haven't even, successfully prosecuted the case. Well, I was an appellate attorney, so.
Right. You lived that life. Yeah.
And I know what could go wrong if people don't think about the case at the beginning. So the grand jurors would give a lot of feedback, and I would always say to them, do you want to hear anything else from that witness? Are there any other witnesses maybe we've talked about you want to hear from? Documents, and always did that. And I would take all the documents. I mean, back when I started, it was a cart.
It was on paper, in a box that you dragged around. Yeah.
You put the papers on the Elmo. And
you got it.
For your listeners who are very young and don't know what Elmo is, it's just the overhead projector.
Yeah, it's not the character from Sesame Street. It is a piece of equipment in the courtroom. Yeah.
Right. And now everything's digital. So it's not me pushing pushing carts over anymore. It's like, I have a thumb drive. And
you got
it in. But you show the evidence, you get feedback, you make sure that you lock down your case, because in my career, at least, and I can speak for myself and probably many of my colleagues, the worst thing I could ever do was indict someone I should not have indicted.
Yeah. No, for real.
And just on that note, the case where the defendant was acquitted, I did not indict that case. I inherited it. Just
I'm sure no one's keeping score out there, but we may see in the comments that that acquittal came back as maybe shouldn't have been indicted. But Trini, obviously we could spend hours and hours talking about white collar crime and fraud. Yes. I want to give you an opportunity too. Any other cases from your time on the government side that are worth mentioning, maybe outside of the fraud landscape, or anything else that was really a landmark in your career?
Outside of the fraud landscape, well, let me just give an overview.
Yeah.
Besides, I spent most of my career prosecuting complex fraud cases, major fraud cases. That's what I went there to do. That's where my heart was. I mean, the cases are meaty. It's like putting puzzles together and finding that needle in the haystack.
Right.
So I love that. But I also was the point of contact for civil rights, and I prosecuted almost all of the color of law cases in the Western District of New York. And I say almost all because sometimes there was just too many cases and one of me. And so other people got a few here or there, but it was mostly me.
Yeah.
I also prosecuted or ran the human trafficking task force for 8-9 years. And those are really difficult cases because you're working with real victims. In many cases who are still being victimized. In some cases, people who didn't even know they were victimized. I mean, they're heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But they're also great success stories. I met some of the strongest people I will ever meet in life who were survivors of human trafficking. Back in 2010, I ran the mortgage fraud task force, which is really just is fraud, financial institution fraud.
Right.
But that's when, if people remember, we were going off the fiscal cliff because it was, mortgage fraud ran rapid. And the thing about fraud cases is you're usually looking at prosecuting professionals.
Right.
Like people, lawyers,
Yep.
brokers,
offices, professional services jobs. Yeah.
Exactly. So those are harder cases in the sense it's not like a drug case, and I'm not degrading my fellow prosecutors who did drug cases, but there's nothing legal about that, right? There's nothing legal about selling fentanyl.
Yep.
So you find somebody selling fentanyl, you can arrest them, you can, move the case forward. In fraud cases with professionals, and especially when it blends, you have to really distinguish, is this a fraud? Was this done on purpose? Like you said, the elements, was there scienter? Was, they trying to conceal? Or was it just bad business judgment or a mistake? And it takes a lot more to distinguish that. So I know your question was a case, a Sentinel case.
Right.
And
you've had them all, it sounds like, a lot of different flavors.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're talking about cases that I personally prosecuted or cases that I supervised as United States attorney.
Well, it's an open season, Trini. You're the guest. You can talk about whatever the heck you want. So.
I don't know. I mean, people probably
You've hit on many of them already, so that's great.
Well, I mean, this one case is still pending, so I don't say much about it. But I was the U.S. attorney when the Tops shooting happened, 514.
Yeah.
And so in my entire career, I never could imagine ever
that type of
case. And also because I didn't really do violent crimes, right? I did, but I did do hate crimes. So that part fell in my kind of wheelhouse, but the rest of it didn't. So that's a case going forward. I'll never forget that period of time. But, I also supervised the case of 2 Rochester police officers got shot and one was murdered. Again, these are violent crime cases. But then I had the case of Robert Morgan. That case I inherited. When I went into the office, that was already pending. And that was a huge, according to my predecessor, the headlines, $500 million kind of mortgage fraud case. I'm not going to lie, it fizzled, right? And we did get 4 convictions, and I think they were righteous convictions. And we got $16.1 million in forfeiture.
Yeah.
So, that was righteous too, but the case kind of fizzled. It didn't,
The initial number wasn't really where it materialized.
Yeah, well, maybe it was. We never got there. You know what I mean? It fizzled for other reasons. So those are cases I handled as U.S. attorney, and they were all really huge cases, really. I was a hands-on U.S. attorney, as one of my AUSAs told me. I don't think she said it with fondness.
It's an observation, maybe, more than a critique.
Right. I think so. But what that meant was when things were happening in the office, I was hands-on. I did understand it. I helped write some of those indictments. I helped, put the cases together. I when I did the Robert Morgan case, I remember, and I should say Robert Morgan et al., because there were other people. I literally was working as an AUSA, writing plea agreements and negotiating the case with the defense attorney, and as U.S. attorney making decisions. So, that's the kind of work I did. But I took pride, and I continue to take pride here as Harter Secrest now, in all the work that I do.
Right. And I want to move into that phase for you now. You've got a couple of exciting things going on in this new phase of your career. Obviously, we've talked about leading the government and internal investigations team at Harter, Secrest, and Emery, but you're out in the community as well, if you want to share some of the things you're doing here in Buffalo and in Western New York.
I'm out in the community. It's true, Chris, or you. We're
I've
kind of
I've seen you out in this community.
Have you seen me?
Yes.
People see me. Yeah, I'm out all the time. Yeah, so on that note, I am part of the co-chair of Mayor-elect Sean Ryan's transition team. So for people listening who don't know, we've had the same administration at City Hall in Buffalo for, let's just call it 2 decades, right? 20 years. So Byron Brown was mayor up until about a year and a half ago. He stepped out. So he was basically 18 and a half, 19 years. The person who moved into that position, Chris Scanlon, was kind of part of the, Brown team.
Yep.
And so we just call it one administration. But Sean Ryan, who is a New York State senator, an outsider from City Hall at least, ran for mayor, beat out Chris Scanlon in the primary, then beat off, I think, two other candidates in the general election. And he is going to be our new mayor starting January 1st. So for me, it was a great opportunity to continue my public service and to give back to the community by making sure I could do whatever was needed to make sure this new administration is going to be what the city needs. So I took that on maybe November. I started here in October, November. So I've been at my new law firm for a month, and now I'm taking on being
for a minute, it sounds like, right? And then
yeah. And I got to tell you, I mean, this is, I guess it's a plug for my law firm, but in a positive way. They were really great about allowing me to do this because it's really important to me. And I would have taken a leave of absence. I would have been here 1 month, took a leave of absence to get through January to be able to help with the transition team. But they've been great giving me the time and the resources I need to do this. But this is the community or the public servant in me. So I'm in private practice and I'm handling, like you said, government, internal investigations for the firm. And I'm leading that practice group. But my heart is still in the community that I live in. I've got to do things because our community, and Chris, you're like this, you know this. Our community is only as good as we make it. Right. We can't sit back and wait for somebody else to make our community good. If we have an opportunity to do it ourselves, then let's do it. I'm all about it. Let's do it. I live 1 block from where I grew up, and now I work maybe 3 blocks from where I went to high school. So I really haven't gone that far in life. I used to say 2 blocks. But now I think it's
you've extended. You've increased 50% the geography distance for you.
Exactly. So
Trini, we so much appreciate. Obviously, you've got so much going on. Giving the podcast some time here and getting to talk to our listeners and viewers. But before we go, we got to run down our standard list of lightning round questions.
Oh my gosh!
With a little bit of a special flavor for you because I know where you're from. First, and maybe easiest or maybe hardest. No, you should not. What is your chicken wing order here in Buffalo, New York? If you're going out for wings, hot, medium, mild, special sauce, what is your style of wing?
I like medium and barbecue from the pit. The pit barbecue. Got
it. We don't need to start debating what has the best wings here in Western New York or all of those pretenders out there in other parts of the country. Keep trying, keep having good wings. We love you, but come visit when you can.
We know.
That's right. Okay, so a few quick questions here outside of the wings. What's one gadget you travel with or office item that you have that you cannot live without?
My laptop.
Just the computer, nothing extra special, no special gadgets or hoodads that are along with you for the ride?
Well, now that I'm at the firm, I have this thing that gives me internet. Right?
Yeah, kind of the hot spot, right?
Yeah, and
super
I'm
helpful.
Not used to that because before I had an office phone, government phone. I would use the hotspot there, but we don't have that here, so I use this.
You got it.
It did not work the last time I tried, Chris. Just last week I was traveling for work and it didn't work. So
I was going to say maybe after our conversation today, I thought maybe it'd be a pad and a pen, right? God forbid you use that old school stuff.
No, I have a little notebook.
You got it. Kind of that gadget. Excellent. Who is someone in your career that you look back on today as being a very significant mentor for you that maybe you didn't realize at the time, but now you say, hey, you know what? All those years ago, that was someone who really pointed me in the direction I ended up in.
Yeah, that's easy. Justice Sam Green. He was a judge at the Appellate Division, 4th Department when I worked there. And I did not know, like you said at the time, how much he was making sure I was on the right track and kind of directing my career. But after, he would call me up, he would, always make sure I was on the right track. Even as U.S. attorney, when he read something in the paper about what was happening, he didn't like, he would call me and say, you need to come over here. We need to talk.
I like that. Followed up all those years later.
He's 90, but he still keeps me on the straight and narrow. He was very happy when I came to Harter Secrest. He told me, it's a good firm. You should go.
Awesome. Excellent. What advice would you give a law student just graduating this year? if they were interested in emulating your career, your accomplishments? What kind of advice would you point that public servant towards?
Well, don't emulate my career. Figure out your own path.
Yeah.
I mean, I love my career and I think it was great, but it's really, for me, I would tell them, do what you're passionate about and do what makes you feel okay at the end of the day. Right. And that's it. So sometimes people have to work at law firms because they have huge student loans.
Yep.
I was fortunate. I got a full rights fellowship to law school. And so I didn't have to worry about that. But that doesn't mean you can't do what you love.
Yeah.
It might mean that sometimes you don't always get to do what you love, but that was the same thing at the U.S. Attorney's Office or at the OIG. But, be true to yourself first and foremost, because we have one life. You need to be happy, but you need to earn a living. You need to, have housing,
You're right.
pay off your student loans. So you can do both. They're not.
There's some practicality to the passion, right? You got to marry those two things together. Great. How about outside of the office? Where's one place that you've traveled to that you love, but you could almost never see yourself living there?
Actually, the place I was going to say, I can't see myself living.
Go ahead.
One place I traveled to that I love all the places that I've traveled to. That's a good one, Chris. I don't know, because I could see myself living in any of those places. But
you're a chameleon.
I went to Kenya. I did 2 weeks as for the government, training prosecutors in Kenya how to prosecute civil rights cases. And I actually got an opportunity to go and live there for 2 years as the legal person. But then things happened with the government, and instead I went to NSFOIG.
Yeah.
I think I wanted to do it. So I guess the point is I want to try new experiences. So even if I maybe would say, I don't know that I could live here. Oh, I know. I will tell you, I don't really like hot weather.
Kenya might be a trouble then. I hear the winters there are different than here in Buffalo.
They're so different. And the summers, But even the South, I lived in Virginia for several years.
Yep.
It gets hot there, the D.C., Virginia area. But I'm happy for those experiences. So I think places I went, I would try to live there, even if it's a short time.
Excellent. And then finally, this is a little bit of a hometown question here. What's one thing about where you grew up that most people don't know that everyone should? So, Trini, I know you're from Buffalo. We're not going to talk chicken wings. We're not going to talk snow. What do people need to know about where you're from that they don't?
So I grew up in the hood. I mean, when I grew up, there were gangs literally going up and down the street, knocking on doors where there were young men saying, you've got to join our gang. Right. And luckily, I have a younger brother, so we weren't targeted. But the people across the street, of course, we knew people who were. And we weren't, for the most part, allowed to go outside and play. Oh, wow. But as I got older, things kind of calmed down. We could. And so, I mean, I think people see you after you forge a career and you become a professional. And what they need to know about me is, there weren't professionals in my family. There were blue-collar workers. Like my dad worked at the Chevy plant. Used to be on East Sullivan. My mom worked at Joanne Fabrics, those sorts of things. So I think people don't realize that when you get to this point, this becomes your norm. And I've been an attorney so long, Chris, so long. I don't even
We're not going to do numbers, but yes, we know.
Right. And so, that I think is important because it's what forged me really, to have the thick skin, to have this passion for justice and righteousness, which can be on the government side. It can be on the defense side. I have the most admiration for many of the defense attorneys I prosecuted against. Right. Yep. We all need that. We need justice is not one-sided. Justice is a system of, making sure that the policies, procedures, and laws are rightfully adhered to.
You got it. Well, great. I can think of no better place to end, Trini. Thank you so much for taking your time to join the Immaterial Podcast today, and we look forward to seeing more from you in the future.
Thank you. And Chris, next time I'll have some stuff on my wall behind me.
Oh, you'll be good.
Your background looks great.
I love it. Thanks.
Thank you.